Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day to come on the election trail.
My name is Jack Blanchard, Politico. With me, as always, is Sam Coates of Sky News, and it is Monday morning. It is day 12 of the campaign. There are 31 days to go until the general election. Sam, the real election has started for me this past weekend. I'm finally back in London from my failed holiday in Anglesey. I wouldn't say excitement is at fever pitch about this election yet, but there were people actually talking about MRP polls on the train in to Euston on Saturday morning, which definitely gave me a sense that someone has noticed there is an election happening now, beyond you and me, who I know are very excited about it.
Talk of MRP polling is close to my heart, as you're about to find out why. Every day we're going to tell you the three things that are going to matter today and in the day ahead. Jack, what are they today?
Yeah, so kicking off the week today, the Tories are trying to stoke some culture wars with a big announcement on gender law changes. Labour want to talk about real, actual wars today. They're doing defence. Keir Starmer will be in the northwest this morning. And up in Scotland, it's the first leaders debate on STV tonight, so we'll talk about that as well. And also a little mention to the Lib Dems, who are talking about, you guessed it, sewage once again in the southeast of England. Let's kick off with equalities, though, Sam. The Tories say today they want to change the Equality Act so that sex is defined only as someone's biological sex. The government says organisations currently at risk of being sued if they restrict access to single-sex spaces to people who identify as transgender. The idea is that this will make it easier for organisations to bar people from places like women's toilets and prison cells, changing rooms if they were not born female. This is a very hot topic, as we know. Why are they doing this now, Sam? Why is something like this a big announcement in a general election campaign?
Particularly, I think, Jack, because the Tories could have done it earlier. This was actually a recommendation from the Equalities and Human Rights body, who argued that you needed to do all of this. And unsurprisingly, it feels like this was unable to do in law while the Parliament was sitting, but now is being deployed in an election campaign because the Tories spy this as a wedge issue, as one of those issues that divides the Conservatives and the Labour Party, because even though Keir Starmer's worked very hard to close the gap between what the Tories say about gender and what Labour says about gender, it isn't exactly the same. It's also aimed at the SNP in Scotland. If you remember, the Scottish Parliament, SNP-dominated Scottish Parliament, passed a bill to make it easier for transgender people in Scotland to get gender recognition certificates than it is in England and Wales. But the Scottish Secretary blocked that, basically saying that interfered with UK-wide equalities legislation. And in December, a Scottish court ruled that the UK government action was lawful, despite a challenge from the SNP Scottish government. So there, again, another area in which the Tories want to divide or highlight divisions with the opposition.
This is obviously a very, very important issue to a lot of people. A lot of people feel very strongly about it. So I'm sort of hesitant to even talk about it in the culture wars sense. But just the fact that something like this becomes a big election campaign tool really does make it so. And I think you're obviously right. They're trying to draw dividing lines between themselves and Labour. I also think they're probably trying to find dividing lines within the Labour Party. Is every Labour politician who gets asked about this today going to be able to give the same answer? I very much doubt it. And the Tories know that by putting this front and centre of their campaign messaging today, that will happen. That will put it on the agenda, and Labour will be asked about it everywhere they go. There is loads of coverage of this around this morning. Sam, Rishi Sunak giving words overnight. They'll be talking about it in Oxfordshire today. There's a Kemi Badenoch op-ed in the Times. They get pretty much a clean sweep of front page coverage today across the right-wing press and the Telegraph and the Times and the Sun and the Mail and the Express. You know, that is exactly what CCHQ wanted to do, and so you can see them using this as a tool, even if it is something that lots of people will agree with, and I mean, obviously lots of people will not agree with as well.
And already, as far as I can discern, there is going to be a difference in the policy response from Labour to this, from what the Tories propose. Labour say, far from there needing to be additional change, which is what Kemi Badenoch is pushing for, the law already makes a distinction between sex and gender. And the problem here has been the Tory government's failure to issue clear guidance on how to maintain single-sex spaces, which they could have done already, says Labour. So you've already got one difference between the two. But then you've got another difference, which is that the Labour Party are looking at making that process of being able to allow people to change their legal sex kind of less medicalised. In other words, Labour want to make it somewhat simpler to change gender. They say their plans would retain the involvement of a doctor and not allow people to self-identify in order to obtain legal changes. But we don't quite know what the process will be, and it'll still involve a doctor, but there'll be a consultation after the next election. These things, as you say, are incredibly angrily fought over at times, but just raising this subject, the Tories hope, will be enough to inflame passions they hope that will work to their political advantage.
So the bigger picture question, Sam, is will it do anything to shift the polls? You know, when we were talking early last week, when we first started doing this podcast on a daily basis, you were saying, you know, the first polls after the campaign launch was announced are about to start dropping, and CCHQ will be on absolute tenterhooks to see whether anything they did in the first few days had shifted the dial. Well, I think having seen half a dozen polls or so now, we can conclusively say that the answer so far has been emphatically no. The public are exactly where they were before Rishi Sunak called this election, if not slightly more in favour of Labour, despite several eye-catching policies from the Tories, despite Labour having a very, very difficult first week messaging-wise, given the huge row over party selections and deselections that engulfed their campaign. Despite all of that, nothing has moved the dial at all. And you start to wonder, Sam, if we see another week like that, at what point are the Tories going to start panicking? Clearly, the idea when Rishi Sunak called this election was that it would focus people's minds. Suddenly they would start listening to the Prime Minister and his new policies in a way that they just haven't been doing over the last few months. There is no sign that that has worked so far. As I say, we're only, a week and a half in. That might still change, and I do think most people only start to really engage in the final week or so, but still, got to be very worrying times for the Conservative Party right now.
Big moment at 5 o'clock today. YouGov are going to do their first, what's known as an MRP. It's a projection of what the House of Commons would look like, what the size of the majority would look like, how many seats each party get. That will be a moment. We're going to do it huge on Sky News and digging really deep into what it tells us about different regions, different groups, and I suspect that will provoke some reaction. Anyway, Labour and defence is another big story of today. What's going on there?
Yeah, Labour's big thing today is focused on defence. Except it's not really a big thing. Again, Sam, it feels more like positioning than policy, which is exactly what we've seen from Labour every time they've made some big announcement. Their shiny thing that they're promising today is a triple lock on the nuclear deterrent. Is there any more phrase more overused in British politics now than the triple lock? Did David Cameron invent the triple lock? And this is like great bequeathment to British politics, is that everything is a triple lock? As far as I can tell, the triple lock on the nuclear deterrent is basically just saying we will maintain the nuclear deterrent no matter what. But obviously the message Keir Starmer really wants to get out here is not about triple locks. It's to tell people once again the same message he's hammering Britain over the head with: I am not Jeremy Corbyn. We have changed. We have changed. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, his previous Labour leader, was not a big fan of the nuclear deterrent, it's fair to say. And Starmer wants to get the message out that Labour is strong on defence, not least because the Tories do spy a weakness here because, as we know, Rishi Sunak promised to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by the end of the decade. Labour has not been able to match that pledge. They say they want to hit the 2.5% target, but they won't say them because they don't know how they're going to afford it. That is a difference between the two parties, and it's one the Tories are keen to press. So Labour are trying to get out in front of that today. They've got a big event in the northwest of England. We'll see Keir Starmer, we'll see his Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey, and we'll also see several of Labour's new candidates who were formerly military officers. The idea here is to try and show voters two things. One, Labour Party is changing that message again. You know, formerly new candidates might be, under Jeremy Corbyn, might be very left-wing activists or think tankers. Now they're people who fought in wars for Britain. And also, I think probably just to show people that, with all the furore about the Labour candidate selection over the last week, look, it's not just Starmer aides who are being parachuted into seats here. We've also got some very impressive people who have fought in the Royal Marines, who've worked in military intelligence. A guy called Calvin Bailey, who worked very senior figure in the RAF. He appeared on a Channel 4 documentary lots of people might have seen about the Afghan war quite recently. Those kinds of people are the face of the new look Labour Party that Keir Starmer wants to present to people today. The question is anybody listening?
Obviously, there's the hangover from last week's row over Diane Abbott. She was tweeting last night, more lies from Starmer at one point. She swiftly deleted the post when he seemed to suggest that he actually had more in common with her than she realised. But this all comes ahead of the Labour ruling body tomorrow, Tuesday, having to rubber stamp the candidates list. So we're pretty much done with Labour's candidate selections. I'm told that is not just a rubber stamping exercise. It's the papers have gone round for the NEC tomorrow. There'll be one question: do you accept the paper submitted that lists all the candidates? Everyone gets to go yes or no. It'll all take place on Zoom or virtually, because several members of the NEC are actually now candidates, which is one of the controversial things about it. But one question on the paper, everyone votes, and it is very much a formality. I think Labour hope will draw a line under it. Clearly, exactly what happens with Diane Abbott and how she chooses to campaign over the next few weeks will be fascinating. But moreover, I think the campaign has settled into something of a much more of a rhythm than the kind of 0 to 100 mile an hour start that we all had. I believe in Labour camps there is now some planning going on starting this week about what Labour might look like in government. Given the polls, that seems sensible, but behind the scenes, those discussions are taking place. Central to that is Sue Gray. Fascinating piece today in The Guardian that talks about how she operates behind the scenes. They pick up one controversial thing, Jack, which is that she has made it her business to improve relations with a couple of groups, the Metro Mayors, we knew that, but also some of those shadow cabinet ministers have been briefed against, and she names Lou Haig, Lisa Nandy and Angela Rayner. She's got quite close to those. I have heard this from Labour circles before, and it does raise one or two eyebrows. Sue Gray particularly aligning herself with some members of the shadow cabinet. If them, why not others? Is what's being asked around some shadow cabinet corners.
I do think that Diane Abbott one still might have a bit of legs to run today, Sam. If she really did tweet more lies from Starmer 2 days before the Labour Party confirms its elections, is that reason to stop her from standing? I mean, if another candidate wrote more lies from Starmer about the Labour leader in an election campaign, how would Labour act? The tweet was apparently immediately deleted. It was picked up by Nick Early in the BBC, but it doesn't feel like the end of the story to me. So that's something else for Labour Party to field questions on today. Let's just talk quickly about the third thing. The other smaller parties, Scotland's the most interesting one today. At 9 o'clock tonight, John Swinney, the new First Minister of Scotland, will be debating Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader, Douglas Ross, the Scottish Tory leader, and Alex Cole-Hamilton, the Lib Dem Scottish leader, in a live TV debate hosted by STV. And that's obviously a very big moment north of the border, not least because we haven't seen a great deal of Swinney and Sarwar going head-to-head yet. The whole dynamic in Scotland has obviously changed very recently with the departure of Humza Yousaf, and it'll be interesting to see how John Swinney, a real veteran of this stuff, I mean, there's a guy who's done plenty of debating, but how will that dynamic work once it's Sarwar and Ross and Cole-Hamilton potentially all ganging up against him? Will he be able to hold his own? Will he, get the SNP urgently needs something to shift the dial up there for them, given the direction of travel on their poll rating? Whether John Swinney's the guy to deliver that, I have no idea.
Then there's the Lib Dems. They are in Henley, bluest of true blue, former Boris Johnson seat. They are talking, what else, about sewage. I don't think Ed Davey will be getting in the water this time. Sewage wrecked the regatta last year, and the party claim they can break through in areas like this. There was an extraordinary omission by Jeremy Hunt that private polling suggests he may well lose his seat. Certainly, if you look at it, despite the huge majority, that's the kind of area that the Lib Dems are targeting. It's fair to say, Jack, I think that Ed Davey's method of campaigning has attracted a lot of attention, but is it for the right reasons? Every day a new stunt in the water, kayaking, going down water slides. Does this work with voters?
I have no idea. It's a really interesting one. I mean, at least, the idea is it better to be talked about than not talked about. I guess they're doing that. I do think sewage is an issue that people take very seriously, though. It's not one for clowning around, certainly not one for falling in the water if the water is full of poo. But, I don't think they would want to be seen as joking about this. It's the one hot button issue that they've got, that they press it and it makes voters enraged, and it obviously works very well in the southeast of England, areas like Henley, like Jeremy Hunt's seats in Surrey as well. So it'll be interesting to see whether this makes any difference to them.
Let's do a quick look at the week ahead. Tomorrow is the Labour NEC meeting, and which we mentioned to rubber state candidates, and it's the first head-to-head debate between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, then on Wednesday and Thursday we're having D-Day commemorations, and Rishi Sunak is going to get sucked out of the electoral cycle and required to go and look very prime ministerly, which maybe helps at commemorations both in England and over in Normandy as well. But equally, he's not out then campaigning on some of the issues he wants to be talking about. So it's a sort of a win and a loss for him in a sense coming up this week. It's also the European elections this week, Sam, which is a massive story happening on the continent. The far-right parties are expected to do well. Not sure that's going to directly impact on the British election, but it's a very big thing that is happening in European politics this week.
And then Friday, candidates are confirmed at 4:00, so that saga is finally over. Could there be one or two more high-profile Tories stepping down before them? We'll see. And then there is a debate on the BBC between leaders. We don't quite know what sorts of leaders. We know Keir Starmer isn't going. We know Rishi Sunak hasn't decided whether or not to go, but that'll be on Friday night.
One more thing just to mention on Friday, Jess Elgar at The Guardian reckons that Labour will be having its Clause 5 meeting on Friday, which is the day the Labour Party decides its manifesto, a very big moment for them. That suggests the manifesto is not far away from being published, not least because it can leak from a Clause 5 meeting, as we've said before, but that'll be another thing to watch for.
Great, well, we'll be back tomorrow, and see you then.
Cheers, bye-bye.